The galaxy had known peace for 3,000 years, and every species believed this peace would last forever. But they were wrong about that assumption in ways they could not possibly understand at the time. The Galactic Concord was the greatest alliance ever formed, bringing together over 400 different species from every corner of known space. And they had built their civilization on one simple rule that nobody was ever allowed to break under any circumstances whatsoever. That rule was about the forbidden frequency. Every young species learned about it in their first contact with the Concord, and the lesson was always the same. There existed a wavelength that could pierce through subspace itself, a signal that could reach every corner of the galaxy at the same time. And using it was the worst crime any civilization could commit. The last species to use the forbidden frequency had been completely destroyed. Their worlds burned to ash, their people scattered across the void, and their very name erased from all records so that nothing remained of them at all. Nobody questioned this law because the founding races of the Concord had made it clear that this was not a matter for debate. And so the galaxy stayed silent on that one frequency while filling the rest of space with their voices and their dreams and their endless conversations. Then came the day when everything changed. A monitoring station on the edge of Concord space detected something that should have been impossible. And the operator who first noticed it thought his equipment must be broken because what he was seeing made no sense at all. A signal was broadcasting on the forbidden frequency. It was weak, and it was crude, and it repeated the same pattern over and over again. A simple mathematical sequence followed by a set of coordinates that pointed to an uncharted region in a distant spiral arm that nobody had ever bothered to explore. The news spread through the Concord like fire through dry grass, and within hours the Senate had gathered for an emergency session that would determine how to respond to this unthinkable violation of their most sacred law. Admiral Vathra of the Concord Enforcement Fleet stood before the assembled representatives and spoke in a voice that carried absolute authority. We will investigate this signal, and we will find whoever is responsible, and we will do what must be done to maintain the peace that has protected us all for so long. Her words received unanimous support because everyone understood what was at stake. And within days, a fleet of 12 warships was traveling toward the source of the mysterious transmission. They expected to find an ancient probe, or perhaps the ruins of some long-dead civilization that had destroyed itself before the Concord even existed. And they were not prepared for what they actually discovered. The planet was called Earth by its inhabitants, and it was covered in blue oceans and green forests and sprawling cities that glittered with lights. And it was absolutely full of life. Humans had achieved interstellar capability only 50 years before this moment, and they had spent all that time exploring their own small corner of the galaxy without ever encountering another intelligent species, which had disappointed them greatly because they had always hoped they were not alone. Dear Elena Vasquez was the scientist who had designed the beacon that was now causing so much trouble, and she had built it with the best of intentions, hoping to reach out across the vast distances of space and make contact with anyone who might be listening. She had no idea that her creation had just doomed her entire species when Admiral Vathra's fleet arrived in Earth's orbit. Humanity's small defense force was completely outmatched, and their leaders quickly realized that fighting was not an option if they wanted to survive this encounter. The Admiral transmitted her message to the entire planet, and her words were translated into every human language so that everyone could understand exactly what she was saying. You have violated the most important law in galactic civilization by transmitting on the forbidden frequency, and now you must submit to the judgment of the Galactic Concord or face complete annihilation. Panic spread across Earth as people tried to understand what was happening and why aliens had suddenly appeared with threats of destruction. And governments scrambled to find someone who could explain the situation and perhaps find a way out of this nightmare. Dia Vasquez was brought before the World Council to answer for what she had done. And she stood there with her head held high, even though she was terrified inside. Because she believed in science and she believed in hope. And she refused to accept that reaching out to the stars had been a mistake. "I did not know about your laws," she told the alien admiral through a communication link. "And my people did not know that anyone was out there to offend. So how can you punish us for breaking rules we never knew existed in the first place?" Admiral Vathra's response was cold and without sympathy. "Ignorance is not a defense. And the law exists for reasons you cannot understand. And the Senate will decide your fate within the next cycle." But even as she spoke those words, something was happening that would change everything. Dr. Vasquez had continued monitoring the signal from her beacon. And she had noticed something that the Admiral and all her advanced sensors had somehow missed. The beacon was not just transmitting outward anymore, something was transmitting back. The return signal came from beyond the edge of known space, from a region so distant that even light would take millions of years to travel there. And yet the response had arrived almost instantly, which meant that whatever was sending it possessed technology far beyond anything the Concorde had ever developed. Dr. Vasquez analyzed the signal with growing horror as she realized what it contained. Star charts showing hundreds of locations across the galaxy. And every single one of those locations matched areas that were labeled as dead zones in the Concorde's own records. These were places where entire civilizations had vanished without explanation. Worlds that had gone silent overnight. Species that had simply ceased to exist as if something had erased them from the universe itself. The pattern was unmistakable once she saw it. And the truth was more terrible than anyone could have imagined. Something ancient and hungry had been listening to the forbidden frequency for millions of years, waiting for signals that would reveal where intelligent life was hiding. And now humanity's beacon had told it exactly where to find the entire galaxy's population. Dr. Vasquez requested an urgent meeting with Admiral Vathra. And when she presented her findings, the Admiral's face changed from contempt to fear in a single moment. "This cannot be right," the Admiral whispered. But her voice was shaking. "It is right," Dr. Vasquez replied. "And you know it is right because you have always known that something was wrong with your galaxy's history. And now you finally understand why so many civilizations disappeared without leaving any trace behind at the very edge of known space." Sensor stations began detecting movement for the first time in recorded history. And what they saw would haunt the dreams of every species in the Concorde for generations to come. Hundreds of vessels were awakening from an ancient slumber, each one larger than a moon, and they were all beginning to move toward the heart of the galaxy. The galaxy's greatest war was about to begin, and humanity had just lit the match that would burn everything. The Galactic Concorde placed Earth under immediate quarantine while the Senate gathered to decide what should be done about both the humans and the terrifying discovery that Dr. Vasquez had made armed vessels surrounded the small blue planet and prevented anyone from leaving or entering. And the people of Earth could only wait and hope that the alien government would show them mercy. Inside the great Senate chamber on the capital world of the Sara Prime, representatives from 400 species argued and shouted and accused each other of failures that had led to this moment. "The humans must be destroyed immediately," declared Ambassador Kryn of the Velthari Dominion, his forearms waving with fury, "because they have awakened something that should have stayed sleeping forever, and they must pay the price for their foolishness." Many voices rose in agreement, because fear was spreading through the chamber like a disease. And frightened people often want someone to blame for their troubles. But There were others who saw the situation differently. "Destroying the humans will not save us," said Elder Morvith of the Pelorian depths, her aquatic form shimmering in her water-filled hovering sphere. "Because whatever is coming will arrive, whether we punish these newcomers or not. And perhaps we should focus on survival instead of revenge." The debate continued for days, while the ancient vessels at the edge of space drew closer and closer. And humanity watched from their quarantined world and wondered if they would even live long enough to face the greater threat. Commander James Okonkwo had spent 20 years in Earth's military before becoming a diplomat, and he was chosen to represent his species before the Senate because he understood both war and words in equal measure. He traveled to the Sara Prime under heavy guard and stood before the assembled representatives of the galaxy, knowing that everything he said might determine whether his people survived or died. "I know that we broke your laws," he began, his voice steady and calm despite the thousands of alien eyes watching him. "And I know that my people caused this crisis through our ignorance and our hope. But I am not here to beg for mercy." The chamber fell silent because this was not what anyone expected to hear. "I am here to tell you that we have information about the enemy that is coming. And I am here to suggest that perhaps you should listen to us before you decide that we are worthless." Admiral Vathra stood near the back of the chamber, and she nodded slowly because she had already seen what Dr. Vasquez had discovered. And she knew that the human scientist had found something important. The Senate agreed to hear the evidence, and Dr. Vasquez was brought from Earth to present her findings in person. She stood before the greatest gathering of intelligent beings in galactic history, and she spoke in simple words that everyone could understand. "Your ancestors created the rule about the forbidden frequency because they were afraid. And now I understand why they were so afraid." She activated a holographic display that showed the star charts from the return signal, and gasps echoed through the chamber as representatives recognized location after location where civilizations had vanished. For millions of years, something has been hunting intelligent life across this galaxy, and they find their prey by listening to a specific wavelength that travels through subspace. And every time a species broadcasts on that frequency, the hunters come and they destroy everything. Elder Morvith leaned forward in her sphere, her ancient eyes wide with recognition. "The harvesters," she whispered, and the words spread through the chamber like a cold wind. The Pelorians were one of the oldest species in the Concord, and their records went back further than most. And buried in those records were stories that had been dismissed as myths for countless generations. Stories about beings that came from the darkness, between galaxies. Beings that consumed entire civilizations and left nothing behind. Beings that the founders of the Concord had barely survived by hiding and staying silent. "We thought they were legends," Elder Morvith continued, her voice trembling. "Stories to frighten children into obedience. But they were real all along, and we simply forgot." The truth settled over the Senate like a heavy blanket. And suddenly, everything made sense in the worst possible way. The forbidden frequency was not just a law designed to maintain peace between species. It was a survival mechanism created by ancestors who had witnessed unimaginable horror and wanted to ensure their descendants would never draw attention to themselves again. And now humanity had broken that ancient protection without even knowing it. Existed. Commander Okonkwo spoke again. Into the stunned silence, "My people made a terrible mistake, and we cannot undo what has been done, but we can help you understand the enemy better, and we can fight alongside you when they arrive, because we are not cowards who run from danger." Ambassador Kryn laughed bitterly at these words. "What can your primitive species possibly offer against beings that have destroyed civilizations for millions of years? Because you are infants compared to us, and we are nothing compared to them." Dr. Vasquez answered that question with data that she had been analyzing since her first discovery. The harvesters communicate with each other using the same frequency that they use to hunt. And this means they are connected in a network that allows them to coordinate their attacks. Across vast distances, she showed them the pattern she had found in the signals. The way individual vessels seemed to respond to a central command structure. The way they moved in perfect synchronization like parts of a single organism. If we can disrupt that communication, we can break their coordination. And if we can break their coordination, we can fight them one at a time, instead of facing them as a unified force. The chamber buzzed with reaction to this idea, and some saw hope in it while others dismissed it as impossible. Our technology cannot interfere with subspace frequencies, Admiral Vathra stated, because we abandoned such crude methods of signal manipulation millions of years ago in favor of more refined communication systems. Dr. Vasquez smiled for the first time since this nightmare had begun. That is exactly why you need us. Because humanity never stopped developing what you call crude methods. And we have spent generations perfecting the art of jamming and disrupting signals in ways that your advanced civilizations forgot long ago. The Senate fell into chaos as everyone tried to speak at once. And the debate that followed would continue for many hours. But something had changed in the room. Humanity was no longer just a criminal species waiting to be punished. They were now a potential ally with knowledge that might make the difference between survival and extinction at the edge of known space. The first harvester vessels crossed into Concord territory, and sensor stations that had monitored empty space for thousands of years suddenly went dark one by one. Galaxy's greatest war had begun, and the sleeping giants were hungry after their long way on the SAR Prime. Commander Okonkwo and Dr. Vasquez looked at each other with determination in their eyes, knowing that the survival of everything might now depend on whether ancient aliens could learn to trust the youngest species in the galaxy. The real fight was just beginning. The harvesters moved through Concord space like a plague that could not be stopped, and every world in their path fell silent forever. The first colony to die was called Meridian 7. A beautiful world of floating cities and crystal towers where 3 million beings had lived in peace for over 1,000 years. And within a single hour, it was gone. The harvester vessel did not attack in any way that the Concord military understood. Instead, it simply descended through the atmosphere and began to absorb everything it touched, converting matter itself into fuel and raw materials, feeding on the planet like a creature feeding on flesh. Ships that tried to fight back were swallowed whole, and weapons that could crack moons apart did nothing against the ancient horror that hung in the sky when the vessel finally left. Meridian 7 was just a dead rock floating in the void, stripped of its oceans and its atmosphere and every trace of the civilization that had flourished there. News of the destruction spread across the galaxy, and panic followed close behind. The Galactic Senate met in emergency session after emergency session. But no agreement could be reached because fear made everyone think only of themselves. We must retreat to the galactic core, Admiral Vathra argued, her voice tired from days without sleep, and consolidate our forces in defensible positions where we can hold out for as long as possible. Many species supported this plan because running away felt safer than standing and fighting against an enemy that seemed impossible to defeat. But Commander Okonkwo stood before them with fire in his eyes and refused to accept surrender. If you run now, you will run forever. And eventually, there will be nowhere left to run. And your children will curse you for choosing cowardice over courage. His words sparked anger and summoned shame in others. And the chamber erupted into shouting matches between those who wanted to flee and those who wanted to fight. Elder Morvath called for silence, and her ancient authority still commanded enough respect that the representatives fell quiet. Let the human speak, she said, because his people caused this crisis, and perhaps they deserve the chance to offer a solution. Okonkwo nodded his thanks and began the speech that would be remembered for millennia. My species has faced extinction many times throughout our history, and every time we survived, it was not because we hid from the danger, but because we stood together and fought back. He told them about the ice ages that had nearly frozen humanity out of existence, about the diseases that had killed millions, about the wars that had threatened to destroy everything their ancestors had built. We are still here because we refused to give up. And we are still here because we learned that the only way to defeat a monster is to face it with everything you have. He walked through the chamber, looking into the eyes of every representative he passed. I know that you are afraid, and you have good reason to be afraid, because the harvesters are terrible beyond imagining. But fear does not have to control you, and running away is not your only choice. He stopped in the center of the room and raised his voice so that everyone could hear. I propose that we stand together. Every species that refuses to die quietly, and that we fight with everything we have. And that we show these ancient horrors that the galaxy is no longer defenseless prey. Ambassador Kryn laughed again. But this time his laughter was weaker. Pretty words from a primitive. But what can we actually do against creatures that have been destroying civilizations for longer than most of our species have existed? De Vasquez stepped forward with a data tablet in her hands. I have been studying the harvester signals since this began, and I have found their weakness. The chamber fell completely silent because everyone wanted to hear what she had discovered. The harvesters are not truly intelligent in the way that we understand intelligence. They are more like machines following very old programming, and they rely entirely on their communication network to coordinate their actions. She displayed her analysis on the great screens that surrounded the Senate chamber. Without that network, individual harvester vessels become confused and erratic, sometimes even attacking each other, because they cannot function properly without constant connection to the whole. Admiral Vathra studied the data with growing interest. And you believe you can disrupt this network? Human technology includes devices we call jamming arrays, which can flood specific frequencies with noise and prevent clear communication. And I believe we can adapt this technology to target the subspace wavelength that the harvesters use. That is impossible, one of the senior military commanders declared, because no known technology can interfere with subspace transmissions at that level. Dr. Vasquez smiled with a confidence that surprised everyone in the room. Your technology cannot do it because you evolved beyond such methods millions of years ago. But humanity never stopped using radio waves and signal interference. And we have become very good at making sure our enemies cannot talk to each other. The irony was not lost on anyone. The most advanced civilizations in the galaxy were now looking to the most primitive one for salvation, because sometimes the old ways were better than the new commander. Okonkwo seized the moment. Let us form a coalition of the willing. Every species that chooses to fight instead of flee. And together, we will build jamming stations across the galaxy, and we will break the harvesters apart, and we will destroy them piece by piece. The vote that followed was not unanimous, but it was enough. 12 species joined the coalition that day, including the Vreth with their incredible engineering abilities, the Pelorians with their ancient knowledge, and several smaller nations who simply refused to surrender their futures without a fight. They called themselves the Defiant, and they began working immediately to construct the first jamming arrays based on human designs. Earth was released from quarantine, and its factories began producing components at a rate that amazed their new allies. Because humans had always been good at building things quickly when survival depended on it. Dr. Vasquez led a team of scientists from a dozen different species, combining their knowledge to create something that had never existed before. A weapon designed not to destroy, but to silence. Not to kill, but to confuse. Meanwhile, Commander Okonkwo traveled from world to world, speaking to leaders and generals, convincing more and more species to join the Defiant Coalition. History will remember this moment, he told them. And history will remember whether you stood with us or whether you ran away. And your descendants will either thank you for your courage or wonder why you abandoned them. By the time the harvesters had consumed their third world, the Defiant Coalition had grown to 47 species. And the first jamming stations were being deployed in strategic locations across the threatened sectors. The galaxy's greatest war was no longer a one-sided massacre. It was about to become an actual fight, and humanity, the youngest and weakest species in the coalition, had become the heart and soul of the resistance. The first real battle of the war happened in the Karth system, where 3 harvester vessels had cornered a civilian evacuation fleet carrying 2 million refugees who had nowhere left to run commander. Okonkwo led the Defiant Strike Force personally because he believed that leaders should fight alongside their soldiers, not hide in safe places while others died for them. All ships confirmed jamming array status. He ordered from the bridge of his flagship, a vessel that the Vreth had built specifically for this mission, 12 small craft spread out around the battlefield, each one carrying a modified version of Dr. Vasquez's signal disruptor. And when they activated their devices, the effect was immediate and dramatic. The 3 harvester vessels, which had been moving in perfect coordination toward the helpless refugee ships, suddenly stopped as if they had been frozen in space. Then they began to drift in random directions, their movements no longer synchronized, their terrible hunger momentarily confused by the wall of noise that was flooding their communication network. All attack wings engage now, Okonkwo commanded. And the Defiant fleet surged forward. The battle lasted 4 hours. And it was brutal and costly, but when it was over, 2 of the harvester vessels had been destroyed, and the third had fled into deep space. Its damage too severe for it to continue fighting. The evacuation fleet escaped safely, and 2 million lives were saved that day. News of the victory spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. And suddenly, the Defiant Coalition was no longer a desperate hope. It was a proven force that could actually win. More species joined the alliance, bringing their ships and their soldiers and their resources, and the coalition grew from 47 members to over 100 in just a few weeks. But the harvesters adapted to this new threat, because they had survived for millions of years by learning from their prey. They began targeting jamming stations directly, sending small fast vessels ahead of their main forces to destroy the devices before the larger ships arrived. Dr. Vasquez worked without rest to improve the technology, making the jammers smaller and more mobile so they could evade the hunters. But each improvement was met with a new harvester counter-strategy. They are learning faster than we can adapt, she reported to Okonkwo during a strategy meeting, her face pale with exhaustion. And we are losing stations faster than we can build them. Okonkwo studied the tactical maps that covered the walls of the command center, watching the red dots that represented harvester forces pushing deeper into Concord territory. Then we need to change our approach, he said, because we cannot win a war of attrition against an enemy that can rebuild itself from the matter it consumes. He pointed to a cluster of red dots that was larger than all the others combined. The main harvester armada is still gathering strength at the edge of known space. And if we do not stop it before it fully awakens, nothing we have done will matter. Admiral Vathra, who had joined the Defiant after the Senate collapsed under the weight of its own fear, nodded in agreement. Our intelligence suggests that the Armada contains over 60 million vessels, most of them still dormant, and if they all activate at once, they will sweep through the galaxy like a wave of destruction. The room fell silent as everyone considered the scale of what they were facing. Dr. Vasquez spoke quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I have been analyzing the communication patterns from the Armada, and I believe I have found something important. She pulled up her data on the main display. The dormant vessels are not fully offline. They are simply waiting for a specific signal that will tell them to wake up and begin hunting. And that signal comes from a central coordinator somewhere in the heart of the Armada. So if we destroy the coordinator, the rest of the fleet stays dormant, Okonkwo said, hope entering his voice for the first time in days. It is not that simple, Vasquez replied, because the coordinator is protected by the vessels that are already active, and we cannot get close enough to attack it with conventional forces. She paused, and everyone could see that she was struggling with something, but there might be another way. She explained her idea, and as she spoke, the faces around the room grew pale with understanding. The coordinator was designed to receive signals and transmit commands, which meant it was constantly listening for the forbidden frequency, waiting for signs of new civilizations to target if someone transmitted a powerful enough signal on that frequency, broadcasting directly toward the Armada from a close enough position. The coordinator would lock onto that signal and try to trace it back to its source. We could lead them into a trap, Vathra said slowly. Draw them somewhere where they would be destroyed by natural forces instead of our weapons. Vasquez nodded. There is a collapsing neutron star in the Vir system, and its gravity well is so powerful that nothing can escape once it gets close enough. And if we could lure the harvesters there, who would transmit the signal? Okonkwo asked, even though he already knew the answer, because whoever does it would have to stay close enough to maintain the signal until the harvesters were fully committed to the trap. The silence that followed was heavier than anything they had experienced before. I will do it. The response is simply, because this is my responsibility, and I will not ask anyone else to die for my mistake. Okonkwo wanted to argue, wanted to find another way, but he could see in her eyes that she had already made her decision, and he respected her too much to take that choice away from her. The plan was set in motion. And while Okonkwo led the main Defiant fleet in diversionary attacks across multiple sectors, Thevarsis traveled alone to a small station near the Vir system, carrying the most powerful transmitter that human technology could build. She spent her last days preparing the equipment and recording messages for her family and her colleagues. And she thought about the strange path that had led her from a hopeful scientist searching for alien life to a soldier, preparing to sacrifice everything for people she had only recently met. The morning of the final operation arrived, and the galaxy held its breath. Dr. Vasquez activated her transmitter and began broadcasting on the forbidden frequency, the same signal that had started all of this, but now amplified 1,000 times and pointed directly at the sleeping horror that waited in the darkness. The harvesters heard her call, and they responded with terrible hunger. 60 million vessels began to move toward her position, the largest fleet ever assembled in the history of the galaxy. And Elena Vasquez watched them come and did not run. She kept transmitting until the very end, leading the monsters toward the light of a dying star. And she smiled, because she knew that her death would mean life for everyone else. The trap was about to close. The neutron star in the Vir system was dying, collapsing into itself with a gravitational pull so powerful that even light struggled to escape its grasp. And it was here that Elena Vasquez would make her final stand. She sat alone in her small station, watching her sensors as the Harvester Armada approached. 60 million vessels drawn toward her signal like moths to a flame. And she felt a strange peace settle over her heart. Commander Okonkwo, she transmitted on the coalition frequency. The harvesters are fully committed, and they are entering the gravity well now. And I need you to know that this was my choice. Okonkwo's voice came back to her, rough with emotion that he was trying very hard to control. Alaya, there might still be time to get you out of there. And we have fast ships that could. No, she interrupted gently, because if I stop transmitting even for a moment, some of them might break away, and we need all of them in the trap. And you know this as well as I do. She could hear the silence on the other end, the weight of words that could not be spoken. "Tell my family that I love them," she said. "And tell the galaxy that I am sorry for waking the harvesters. But also tell them that I am proud to have helped stop them." The armada was close enough now that she could see individual vessels on her display, each one larger than a moon. Ancient machines of destruction that had ended countless civilizations before this day. She increased her signal strength and began broadcasting her final message. "Come and get me," she whispered, "because I have been waiting for you." The harvesters surged forward. All 60 million of them focused entirely on her small station and the signal it was producing. And they did not notice, or did not care, that they were falling deeper and deeper into the grip of the dying. Starting at 83% of the entire harvester force was inside the event horizon. Before the first of them realized something was wrong, by then it was far too late. The gravitational forces tore the ancient vessels apart like paper in a hurricane, crushing them into atoms, erasing millions of years of accumulated destruction in a matter of seconds. Dr. Elena Vasquez watched the death of the monsters through her station's cameras, and she saw something beautiful in the way they burned. And she thought about all the civilizations they would never consume, all the children who would grow up because these horrors were finally being destroyed. Her station began to shake as the gravity pulled at her too. And she closed her eyes and thought about her parents and her friends and the blue skies of Earth that she would never see again. Goodbye, she transmitted one last time. Then she was gone, taken by the same forces that had claimed her enemies. And the galaxy became a little bit safer because one brave woman had refused to let others pay for her mistakes. Commander Okonkwo received word of the Armada's destruction while leading a battle against the remaining harvester forces in the Meridian sector. And he had to stop for a moment and simply breathe because the weight of what had happened was almost too much to bear. All defiant forces, he broadcast to every ship in the coalition fleet. Dr. Elena Vasquez has succeeded, and the main harvester armada has been destroyed. And now it is time for us to finish what she started. The remaining 7% of the harvester force was scattered across the galaxy. Individual vessels or small groups that had been on hunting missions when the trap was sprung. And without their network to coordinate them, they were confused and vulnerable. The defiant fleet hunted them down over the following months, battle by battle, system by system, until the last ancient vessel was finally destroyed in the orbit of a small moon that nobody had ever thought was important. The war that had threatened to end all intelligent life in the galaxy was over, and the youngest species in the Concord had led to victory in the aftermath. The galaxy was transformed in ways that nobody had expected. The old Galactic Concord had collapsed during the war, its leaders either dead or discredited by their cowardice. And something new needed to take its place. The defiant coalition gathered on the Sar Prime to decide what that something would be. And representatives from over 200 species filled the great Senate chamber that had once hosted the fearful debates of the old Order. Commander James Okonkwo stood where he had stood years before, when he had first argued for humanity's right to survive. And he looked out at the faces that now looked at him with respect and admiration. "We have won a great victory," he began. "But victory means nothing if we simply rebuild what we had before. Because what we had before was built on fear and hiding. And fear and hiding are what nearly destroyed us all." He walked through the chamber as he had done before. But this time, no one looked at him with contempt or suspicion. "I propose that we build something new. An alliance based not on silence but on communication, not on fear but on courage, not on hierarchy but on equality." When the other species offered humanity the leadership of the new government, Okonkwo declined, and his refusal surprised everyone who had expected the victors to claim the spoils of war. "My people do not want to rule the galaxy," he explained, "because we have seen what happens when one group holds power over others. And we want something better than that. He proposed shared governance, with every species holding equal voice, regardless of their age, or their power, or their technological advancement. And the proposal was accepted with overwhelming support. The new alliance of defiant worlds was born that day, and it would grow to become the greatest cooperative endeavor in galactic history 1 year after the end of the war. A monument was erected at the coordinates where Dr. Vasquez had made her final stand. A beautiful structure that could be seen from light years away, and representatives from every species in the alliance came to dedicate it. The inscription was simple, written in 1,000 languages so that everyone could understand. She spoke so that others might live. The forbidden frequency was renamed the Vasquez Band in her honor, and for the first time in galactic history, it was used not for silence or destruction, but for communication. A new beacon was built, broadcasting a message of welcome and unity across the stars, inviting anyone who heard it to join the alliance and share in the peace that had been won through sacrifice and courage. The message went out into the darkness, between galaxies, reaching further than any signal had ever reached before. And this time, the galaxy was not afraid of what might answer, because they had learned something important from the humans who had accidentally started the war and then helped to win it. Running and hiding might keep you alive, but standing together and facing your fears is what makes life worth living. The stars seemed brighter somehow, as if the universe itself was celebrating the birth of something new, and somewhere out in the vastness of space, the signal from the Vasquez Band continued its endless journey, carrying hope to places that had never known hope before. Speaking for a galaxy that had finally found its voice, the end was also a beginning, and the future stretched out before them like an endless field of stars waiting to be explored. Humanity had come a long way from the small blue planet where they had first looked up at the night sky and wondered if they were alone. Now they knew the answer. And the answer was beautiful.